Well, we have been trying to make the circular economy a reality. And in order to bring about this circular economy in 2015, we came out with an action plan which contained 52 actions and also foresaw, very importantly, a complete overhaul of our waste policy. And we have since then been taking action in a number of fields. So, for example, we've been looking at fertilizer use, trying to promote the use of organic fertilizers. We've been looking at the chemical waste interface very recently. We've come out with a plastic proposal, a platform on food waste. So all of those are initiatives that look at various parts of the production cycle and try and stimulate a greater circularity. And in fact, there is a sort of whole set of reasons for it, which are both environmental, but also economic and also social. So we see it essentially as a triple win model. So we have come to the conclusion, obviously, that implementing a circular economy just in Europe is not going to work, and essentially for two reasons. One, the egoistic one, that supply chains are global. So if consumers require or we mandate, for example, products that are repairable or recyclable, we need to have a conversation with the countries that produce so that they can become part of this new way of producing. But at least as importantly, we think the kind of story that we have in mind for Europe, which shows that through a circular economic model you can be more competitive and you can create jobs, is one that works for the developing world just as much and is just as important. And we need to avoid basically that these developing countries become locked into an economic model that basically leads to a lot of pollution, leads to a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, and they would then be left with the cleanup cost for this, and they can even less afford it than us. So that means we need to have an increasing conversation with developing countries. So DG DevCo does a lot of that, working, for example, through the Switch to Green program, working major donor to PAGE, is a partnership on the green economy. DG Environment does circular economy missions, so we visit countries together with business leaders to demonstrate how this can work. We're engaged in a dialogue with the G7, with the G20, and we're generally trying to work with DG DevCo to come up with a more coherent approach how we can promote the circular economy and also what the story and the narrative is that we should be sharing with developing countries that might also work for their economic realities. Well, I think the challenges are similar and then to different degrees. One thing is important, always I think that we in the developed world not only preach but also practice a bit what we say. So very clearly, if you talk about the resource crisis of the planet, it's not just about being more efficient, it's also about consuming less. And if you're in a high consuming country, so in the developing world, it's also a little bit about lowering the ceiling. And that's an uncomfortable concept, I think, for many of our citizens to come around to that, and it's something we still need to work on. Well, I think I don't want to speculate about doomsday scenarios, but getting it wrong is simply not an option. We're currently using, I think, 1.6 times the resources of our planet, and that's with a population of whatever it is, 7.2 billion today. This is projected to rise, as you know, to 9, even to 11 billion come the turn of the century. So clearly the resources we have, if we continue using them the way we do, are not going to be sufficient. And I think what is likely to happen is we could have situations of greater volatility, not just in terms of prices, but in terms of political stability, as a resource scarcity turns into a resource crisis in many countries. And for water, we see this as an example, but it can also happen for other materials. And secondly, it's not just about scarcity or running out of resources in the short term. It is also about the pollution and the associated health impacts that the current model brings with it. And that is, again, I think, one that populations, as we move through the 21st century, will not be willing to accept. And they will understand that there is a different way of doing things, and they will want that for their countries.